Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. My name is James Evelegh and I'm the editor of In Publishing. My guest this time is Claire Hodgson, editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan UK, which this year celebrated its 50th birthday. During her time at Cosmo, Claire has overseen a huge growth in its digital and social audience, and earlier this year a major redesign of its print product, which remains a key platform for the brand. Claire tells us about the importance of moving with the times and staying relevant.
And when you're a young women's brand, by default, you have to be a brand that embraces the new and responds to change, I think, with excitement and rises to the challenges you're faced with. And if you're going to be relevant in the lives of a young audience, you have to be on the platforms they're using.
She explains why the issue of trust matters so much.
I want us to be that audience's kind of best friend. And if you're going to have that relationship with your audience, they have to be able to trust you. And I think that, you know, our audience demographic in particular are sort of increasingly swayed by sincerity, I think, in the brands they engage with. And they just don't have time for performative behaviour. And I think they smell that a mile off.
And she looks forward to Cosmo in the Metaverse.
We could have Cosmo readers coming and being able to walk through the virtual Cosmopolitan office in the Metaverse. I think that level of access and interaction is it can't be anything other than exciting. But you know, I think, as we've talked about, it's kind of jumping in, playing around, being optimistic and excited about it, but also cautiously considering those other very important topics around accessibility, safety, and all of those things as well,
amongst many other things. Before we hear more from Claire, a quick word about our valued sponsors. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Air Business, a market leader in distribution and subscription management services for the publishing industry. Its end-to-end service includes subscriber acquisition and marketing strategy, worldwide distribution, digital mail and e-commerce fulfillment, and warehouse and freight logistics. For more information, visit airbusiness.com. Claire Hodgson, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you, James. Lovely to be here.
And congratulations on the Cosmopolitan brand hitting 50 years. That's very exciting.
It is very exciting. And I have to say, I feel incredibly lucky to be the editor at the helm of such an amazing brand in its 50th year. There was a real pinch me moment, I think, putting the issue together at the start of this year, which was the exact 50th anniversary issue. That was wonderful. And we had the fantastic Monroe Bergdorf on the cover. And it was a really lovely issue that gave us an opportunity to kind of celebrate the brand's heritage and everything it stands for. So it's been a wonderful year to be editor.
And I believe you've had a redesign recently as well, is that right?
We have, yeah. I mean, I think the wonderful thing about anniversaries is it gives you a really good opportunity to kind of look back at your brand's heritage, what made it great over the last 50 years. But I think it also provided us with a real opportunity to think really long and hard again about what we are now and what we want to be in the future. From our June-July issue this year that came out in the summer, we had a redesign for the first time in quite a few years, probably our biggest redesign, I would say, in around a decade. And it was very exciting. I have to say, that issue, seeing it come out, it just feels really kind of fresh and modern, and I think has just really brought the brand up to date, and also I think married the print edition a lot more closely with what the brand identity is across our digital platforms as well.
So what were the pillars of the rebrand? What were the kind of main aspects, and what were you looking to achieve?
Really, a lot of the redesign was all around the visual side of the brand, to be honest with you. I think I feel really strongly that the content we create across all of our platforms has been fantastic and remains to be fantastic. And it's something I'm very proud of. But I think that, you know, the aesthetic that a young woman wants from a print publication and from any brand really is changing very quickly and all of the time. And while you can reflect kind of cultural changes very quickly in content, sometimes it's harder to do that visually, I think, because you don't want to do that and kind of lose your brand identity. So it was really important that we kind of looked at all of our platforms holistically and had a really good think about what we wanted to change. And so, yeah, a lot of that came down to the visuals, making sure that the fonts we were using felt modern and up to date, making sure the images we were using felt super diverse, super inclusive, and a bit more kind of fitting in a young woman's life, rather than something that was starting to feel a bit dated, I think.
And if you look back over the last 50 years, obviously you've only been here for the last 10 or so, I'm guessing, but what would you say are the biggest achievements of the brand since it launched in 1972? And I suppose, how does Cosmopolitan today compare with the 1972 offering?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, as you say, I've been on the brand for about 8.5 years now, but a reader of the brand for probably about 25 years, I suppose. And I think that, you know, culture evolves, and so much has changed over the 50 years that this brand has been around. But I also think that there's a lot that has actually stayed the same. So I think many of our values as a brand are still fairly consistent, you know, and our title says it all: Cosmopolitan. You know, diversity, representation, inclusion, they've always been a part of this brand's sort of core DNA. And since our launch in 72, I think we've really championed that. And whether that's been through, you know, quite groundbreaking covers like Boy George or Jonathan Van Ness, or the features we've done on everything from LGBTQ rights to racism, and obviously equality as well, both in relationships and in the workplace. So I think while some of that stuff has actually remained quite consistent for our brand over the last 50 years, I think what has obviously changed is how we are reaching our audience and how we're telling young women's stories. So I think the thing that's different for me as an editor now is we're thinking a lot more about Cosmopolitan holistically as a brand that spans mediums and platforms. So yeah, kind of thinking back to 8 years ago, even in that time, we've seen huge changes in that regard. So, you know, back in 2008, we were celebrating, I think it was 176,000 users on the website. But then in 2015, we started to really invest in the digital brand specifically. And now we're averaging over 17 million users to the website every month. So to go from 176,000 to 17 million in a month, as well as kind of having a huge social following, we have around 40 million people that come to watch our videos every month. So I think there's been so much development when it comes to how our brand reaches people and the platforms we're reaching them on.
Well, those figures are fantastic, and audience engagement is presumably something which is done very differently now as opposed to 50 years ago for very obvious reasons. How does Cosmo go about engaging with its audience?
Well, look, audience underpins everything, I think. And when you're a young women's brand, by default, you have to be a brand that embraces the new and responds to change, I think, with excitement and rises to the challenges you're faced with. And if you're going to be relevant in the lives of a young audience, you have to be on the platforms they're using and offering relevant content to them in a relevant format on those platforms. So we were one of the first launch partners on Snapchat Discover, and then later on Snapchat Shows as well. And then obviously over the last few years, we've adapted to, you know, everything and anything really. So Instagram stories, Reels, IGTV, TikTok, the list goes on really. And that's as well as sort of playing with other emerging platforms as well along the way. But I think really, regardless of all of that, for me, it comes down to the fact you have to be your audience's best friend. You know, you've got to use the tools at your disposal to get to know them, sort of hang out with them, I think, really, you know, converse with them, challenge them, figure out what makes them tick. And I think ultimately it doesn't really matter what platform you've got an account on if you actually don't know how to use it authentically and engage with your audience in an authentic way.
So how do you and your team, how do you go about, as you say, almost becoming friends with your audience? I mean, you know, we all have very busy lives. Publishing is non-stop. How do you find the time to make that engagement with your audience?
It just has to be a priority. I don't think it's just interwoven in everything we do, really. I think that, you know, anyone who's working at a media brand and feels like they have to set aside time to get to know their audience, I think it should just be part of all day every day, really. I think especially, you know, in the sort of digital age we're in, you just have so many touch points with your audience. I think obviously there's always been things like, you know, reader focus groups and panels. They've existed for decades, and there's still value to those things. Absolutely, there's something so special about meeting an audience member in real life at an event or on the street or, you know, in any real life scenario. But there's also something really fantastic about having real-time data on your website and what your audience are reading and what they're interested in and what pages they're spending the most time on. You know, being able to have that constant social connection with your audience. So I think it's just part of what we do as a team. I'm lucky that I have a fantastically cross-platform team that are just really strong across everything from, you know, print to digital to social. So I think it comes very naturally to all of them to do that anyway. And it's getting that balance, I think, between listening to that data and hearing what your audience are telling you, but also kind of using, you know, I don't think by any stretch the sort of, you know, the age of the editor is obsolete at all. You know, I have some fantastic experts in their respective fields on my team. And part of the reason we're all in the jobs we're in is that we've been doing this for a long time, and it's our job to be very keyed into what an audience want. And I think, you know, data is fantastic. And I think it would be foolish for any brand not to sort of see their reader data as gold dust. But I think there's still a huge amount of value to be had in that kind of editorial insight. And sometimes I think as an editor, you can actually predict what your audience wants better than they can.
All right. Any examples of that?
God, it varies massively, really. You know, I think there are things that our audience tell us, you know, I've sat in reader focus groups before where there's been certain cover stars people have said they wanted, or, you know, they've said things like, oh, you know, we're bored of reading kind of celebrity news, for example. But, you know, entertainment is our biggest section on the website. It's very closely followed by beauty and by sex and relationships, which are huge audience sizes for us. But people love entertainment. They love celebrity. They love TV. They love movies. It's kind of embedded in everyone's lives. And what I would say is that our approach to celebrity and entertainment content is very considered. I think I feel very passionately that our entertainment content is, you know, positive, and that it's a nice, it's how I feel about the brand generally. I want it to be a nice place to be for anyone that's spending time with us. And so part of that for me is making sure that our coverage feels positive on the most part. And I don't mean necessarily, you know, always complimentary of people, but that it's fair and it's considered and that it's fact checked and that it's not too gossipy and it's not too salacious. And I think, you know, there have been moments over the last few years, particularly with the pandemic and some of the things that have gone on in the entertainment industry. You know, we worked very closely over the years with Caroline Flack, for example. She'd been a cover star for us many times, and a lot of people on the team had built up a relationship with her. And you know, when she very sadly passed away, news of what may or may not have happened and the information around it was everywhere on the internet. And within about an hour, I just put a message out to my team and I said, we're not covering this. I'm not interested. I don't care if this is going to deliver us huge volumes of traffic. I'm not engaging in a traffic chasing race with these other brands to cover a story that actually is quite upsetting. And, you know, was the loss of a really wonderful woman who our audience cared a lot about. So we think about those things a lot, and that's very important to me. And I think that while sometimes audiences might tell you, you know, they want to just read constantly 6,000 word features that are really in-depth reports, which we do produce, and they do very well for us, which is why we've always been a staunchly proud features magazine. We do also know people just want a break and they want to be entertained and they like that content. So we do it, but we try and do it with mindfulness, I think, and really consider our approach.
And your treatment of, you know, the Caroline Flack, you know, the sad story of her passing. What feedback did you get from your audience? Because as you say, demand globally or on the internet was huge for information. Did anybody say, why can't you give us more? Or did they respect where you were coming from?
No, but I mean, to be honest with you, in instances like that, that's about doing the right thing as an editor. We didn't put out, you know, a message on our social media platforms saying, hey, we're not going to cover this because we don't think it's right. For me, those decisions, it's not even about, are we going to get great audience engagement and should we put, you know, there wasn't even that consideration. It was just about doing the right thing. So I think a lot of our audience won't even have realized we took that stand. They just will have kind of thought, oh, okay, Cosmo's not covering it. But I think that was equally important for me, that just because we'd taken that decision, we didn't weaponize that decision to also be some kind of brand opportunity either. It was just the right thing to do. So, I mean, there was certainly no criticism of it. And I think a lot of times in this day and age, that speaks volume in and of itself. And I think the brand growth we have seen over the last few years and the way we do approach situations like that, I think that is the telling response that we need from our audience to say that they respect us as a brand and can see that generally we're trying to do the right thing and make the right choices.
And would you say that boils down to, I suppose, the issue of trust, that people trust you to toe I was about to say toe a particular line, but that sounded negative. Trust you to present things in a certain way.
I think so, yeah. And I appreciate you bringing up the question of trust, actually, because it actually means I get to share with you one of my favourite facts about the brand, which is actually that we did a reader survey at the end of last year, and we actually found out that 96% of our readers trust what they read and see across our brand, which for me in this day I think is phenomenal. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. I mean, when we had that feedback back, that's the best compliment I think you can get from an audience, because as a team, integrity is so important to us and building that trust is so important to us. I think because we're a brand that talks about very emotional and personal issues sometimes, and as I said, I want us to be that audience's kind of best friend. And if you're going to have that relationship with your audience, they have to be able to trust you. And I think that, our audience demographic in particular are sort of increasingly swayed by sincerity, I think, in the brands they engage with. And they just don't have time for performative behavior. And I think they smell that a mile off. So I think the thing is with trust is it's built over time. And I think, again, to come back to it being our 50th anniversary, I think it's meaningfully integrating people from all walks of life onto your pages and onto your platforms regularly, and not just on special calendar dates. And I think it's also giving honest and real world, recommendations about products, or as I said, are provided by experts who aren't just kind of churning out clickbait. And I think it's also about having clear and transparent processes when it comes to labeling sponsored content, and all those sorts of things. I think all of that feeds into trust. And to go back to the conversation earlier, I think it's about constantly evaluating and working on your moral compass as a brand and as a team that work on that brand. And I think you have to be clear on what you stand for and believe in it, because I think if you don't believe in it, then why would your audience believe in it?
When you take on new members of staff in the editorial team, how do you imbue that, those ethics into them? Because presumably, a lot of people will come on board and maybe come at it from a different angle. They want to put out something which will get millions of views. So how do you go about ensuring that doesn't happen?
I mean, there's a variety of ways. I think that as I said, our team are very connected to the data. We're not a brand that is rewarding and incentivizing individual writers based on traffic performance. All of our departments know their traffic targets. They kind of know roughly the direction we want to be going in, which is growth, to maintain the amazing growth we've seen. But I also feel that, I want us to be doing the incredible long read investigations we do that obviously are quite often not going to get quite the same traffic volume as the latest celebrity story might, but that absolutely does not make that other piece of content any less important. It's in a lot of ways more important. And so I think that's part of it, is I think, working really kind of carefully with your team so that they do understand the brand strategy and they understand the direction of movement, but also they're not kind of in this competitive space where they're just chasing numbers, because that's not our goal. Our goal isn't just chasing numbers, it's creating great content for our audience and creating a good variety of content for our audience. So I think that's very important in kind of growing that with them. And some of it's also just, through editing. I'm as I've said, I'm very lucky that I have some fantastic senior support staff around me, and all of us are just very careful. I think when new writers come in, it takes time to adjust to the Cosmopolitan tone, to get that balance between, yes, you want to be chatty and funny and relatable, and you want the reader to feel included in what you're talking about and not feeling talked down to, but I think obviously you also don't want to skew it too far in that direction, because we are trained journalists trying to write well-informed, factually correct and intelligent copy as well. So a lot of it's working with new staff on kind of finding their voice, finding their voice in our voice as a brand, I think is how I would describe it. And that's a process and it takes time, but it's an important thing to invest in for, you know, the development of the people who join the team, but also the development of our brand and our relationship with our reader.
And the reader, how would you characterize the typical Cosmo reader?
I wouldn't.
I mean, who are they? What? I mean, young women, I suppose, is the straight answer. But, you know, what's important to them? What are their concerns? And I suppose, what do they want from you as a brand?
Yeah, I mean, our audience is so varied and so diverse. I hesitate to even use the phrase young women on a regular basis now, because I think we are such a gender fluid brand and the content we create is so beyond those kind of cisgendered heterosexual stereotypes. And I think the fantastic thing about our brand, and particularly where we're at now, is we are for everyone and everyone is welcome here. And I just hope that everyone feels sort of seen when they engage with Cosmo. And I think that's what they want from us. I think in a world that is so divisive, so scary, so confusing, and so exclusionary to a lot of people, I kind of want us to be that safe space for them, I suppose. So, you know, somewhere where we can challenge them, entertain them, ask hard questions, but also make you laugh, I think. And I suppose in that regard, I think, you know, in the way I would find it hard to kind of encapsulate our reader now, because they're so varied and so multifaceted. That's kind of how I would like to see us and our brand as well. So I think it's a process of kind of evolving together and mirroring. And I think a lot of that, again, comes back to our values over the last 50 years, in that we are a brand that, you know, is kind of bold and brave, and we aren't afraid to talk about the things that others might be. So yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think, of course, a lot of people would still see Cosmopolitan as a brand and think, right, that is very much, you know, a stereotypical 16 to 35-year-old who is going out clubbing on a weekend, loves her fashion, loves her beauty. But I think, you know, the younger generations, you know, millennials through to Gen Z and moving on to Gen Alpha, they're not as homogenous as that. You know, they are such a varied audience with varied tastes, and I think a lot more free of stereotypes and kind of less siloed, I think, than previous generations were.
Understood. This is probably going to come across as a very stereotypical question, but I mean, do you get lots of men visiting the brand, or is it predominantly women? I'm presuming it is.
I mean, we don't track gender, to be honest, and I think it's, again, you know, we're talking in gendered terms here. There's a huge growing population of non-binary people who visit our brand. You know, as I said earlier, we had the phenomenal Monroe Bergdorf on our 50th anniversary cover, who is the out and proud trans woman, and I think that there's a much broader spectrum, I think, of gender identity, sexual identity now. So yes, I would say the majority of our audience identify as women. You know, there are also a lot of non-binary people, gender fluid people, and probably, you know, men as well who are engaging with our brand.
And what are their concerns? I mean, there are an awful lot of kind of culture war issues at the moment. You know, being hyped by people, politicians included, which kind of steer towards some of the issues you're talking about. Does that show itself in the concerns of your readers?
It does, and I think it's, as I said, you know, the world is such a scary place to be at times at the moment, and does feel very divided in a lot of ways. And I think that if we tried to tackle every issue going on, I don't think any of us would ever leave the office. I think we'd just have to set up camp here and, you know, load ourselves with caffeine to just never sleep. So I think our job as a brand, and my job as an editor, has been trying to drill down into the issues that matter to our audience within that, or certainly the ones we think as a brand we have the most authority on and the biggest possibility to change, or to just, you know, raise awareness of, shine a light on. So, you know, I think some of the things I'm really proud of in that space that we've done has been, in the last year we helped the charity Refuge change a law which made it illegal to threaten someone to share nude images of them. And I think we've consistently sort of campaigned for better awareness and resources for domestic abuse and sexual assault survivors as well. And we've actually very recently just worked with the BBC on an investigation into the deepfake porn epidemic, which is honestly mind-blowing. But it means that right now someone could take a random picture of a woman just living her life that happens to be on the internet or a social media platform somewhere, spend as little as £5 and have it turned into a very convincing piece of pornographic material by an automated bot, which can obviously then go on to be distributed across the internet. And right now that is completely legal, and it's very, very hard to charge anyone with an offence in that field. So those are the things for me when we talk about the world our reader are living in, that we're kind of laser focused in, is obviously what is affecting young women and how can we make a difference.
And are those issues which come to you from the readers, or is this, as an editorial team, very much in touch with your readers that you're aware of and you run with? So how do these campaigns start off?
It's a combination of both, I would say. We certainly know our readers well enough and listen to what they're telling us enough to know how important these things are. How their safety has been impacted, and their sense of safety over the last few years, I think we know how important that is to them. It's important to all women. And I think, having a team who very much reflect the audience we create content for is very helpful in that regard, because, we're a great melting pot to start with and think, well, what are we worried about? What do we care about? But I mean, to be honest with you, we go from that place of getting a broad sense of what our reader cares about. But I would say, particularly with those long read investigations that are kind of print led, they are something very much that come from the team. I've got some truly phenomenal writers and editors on my team that have won many an award for their journalism, and it's probably one of the great joys of my job, really, is being able to sit in the features meetings we have every couple of months and just hear the incredible ideas that the team bring. They really take their job seriously, and they are so tapped into what is going on in the world. And I think that's where we definitely do lead with editorial expertise over what we think our reader want, because obviously what our reader wants when we talk about print, what our reader wants right now is going to be very different in 6 months. And a lot of the time that's how far ahead we're planning. So it's really important that we as an editorial team are way ahead of where our audience are at, looking at what trends are happening, what conversations are happening, what laws are looking at being passed, and what emerging technology there is, what's happening in politics, and kind of like projecting that forward. I think, what are the ramifications of that going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And so actually a lot of these ideas, the deepfake porn piece, our writer Jenny, who wrote that, also wrote a fantastic piece last year around men who are trading nude images of their partners without their partner's knowledge, called The Nude Traders, which actually was just featured in a Panorama documentary as well. So that's how far ahead they are. And I think that's one of the best things about working on this brand and with that team, is that we've really got to push ourselves to be kind of trend forecasters and very future focused, as well as quite bizarrely also thinking very much about today and what's going out on our website and on our social platforms. So it's quite a dual role in that sense.
I mean, some of those issues you're taking on, the campaigns, they're very dark. It's horrible, really. So it must be very it's thrilling for you when you make a difference, I suppose, and when you raise these issues up in terms of people's consciousness.
I mean, absolutely. And we feel the responsibility of the brand we work on. At the end of the day, Cosmopolitan is still the biggest young women's brand in the UK, and is obviously has huge clout internationally, a huge international presence. And when you've got a huge print audience and you've got 17 million readers coming onto your website every month, you have a responsibility to talk about the tough stuff. And I think that's one of those things that I think I'm always keen for people to understand about our brand. And if you haven't picked up a copy of Cosmopolitan in a while, or you haven't been on our website in a while, just have a look at it, because I think that people forget that we are producing, I truly believe, some of the best journalism happening in the industry, particularly as it relates to young women and what they're experiencing in their lives. And it does feel fantastic. It's, you know, I almost wish, of course, that we didn't have to talk about these things and they didn't exist, but unfortunately they do. And it is very rewarding, I think, when we know we've educated our audience on something that they should be, you know, aware of, and that's a consideration for them, or that we've made a difference in their lives. And I think, as I talked about earlier, I think it's one of the things I love about this brand is that you do have the freedom to have these very, very dark and in-depth conversations, and then the next minute kind of go, you know, hey, well, what are you up to on a Friday? Because actually there's a great new mascara that's come out that you might want to try. And
Yes.
and that's what it's like being a young woman and a young person today. You know, you can be all of those things. You can be someone who cares deeply about politics, and you can also be someone who wants to wear a great lipstick that isn't going to rub off on your wine glass.
Okay. Now, how is your editorial team organized? You're obviously a multi-platform brand. We've spoken about that. You know, you've got a team of people. Does everyone work across everything, or do you specialize per platform?
It's a mixture of those things. So the team is roughly divided into topic verticals, really to make sure we've got the right expertise and depth of knowledge across each area. So, you know, beauty, features, entertainment, fashion, etc. So those content teams, yes, they do work brand wide, producing content across print and the site, as well as supporting on social and video and those kind of more multimedia aspects. So that means that each area has really got the ability then to tailor content accordingly and decide what's going to work best where, and obviously in some joyful cases what works best everywhere in some way, shape or form. And we've really found over the last few years that model's helped us work far more efficiently and collaboratively as a brand. But we then also have a phenomenal video team who do all of our filming and producing and oversee strategy there, and a social team who work across our 8 social platforms as well, who create content specifically for those platforms. So it's kind of a lot of people working very cross-platform, but within each of those areas, very, very kind of skilled experts as well in their areas.
And we talked about print. Well, we've talked a lot about print. Where does, obviously launched the print title in 1972. It's still obviously an important part. So what does print bring to the Cosmopolitan mix, you know, both now and in the future? What's special about it?
Oh, so much. And it's so important to our brand. And, you know, our passion for print has remained consistent. You know, print is our shop window, and it has a huge halo effect on the rest of what we do as a brand in terms of, you know, brand recognition and authority. I don't know, there's just something about print, I think, that just lends itself to quieter time and deeper engagement. I think it's just a different experience. And it was print that first got me into this industry. I spent most of the middle of my career working in digital for about 10 years, but I love print, and I love the immediacy and constant connection you get in digital. But there's just something special, I think, about holding a magazine in your hand, you know, creating a stellar cover, you know, editing a 6 or 8 page features report. You know, I think it's just special. And for me, as I said, you know, print has just remained a really important part of our ecosystem as a brand, and our paid for readership was actually up in this ABCs. Paid subscribers increased by 28% last year. Digital edition sales grew by 89%. So yeah, I think there's a very strong future for print, and I think it's going to be a very important part of our brand for a very long time to come.
And digitally, you've obviously seen huge growth over the last 5 or 6 years, both in your digital audience and your social media audience. What has been the strategy, you know, to grow that audience? So you joined, I think, Claire, did you say in 2015 roughly, and it's grown a lot since then. What strategy did you bring to the table?
I think I can bring a strategy to the table, and I have done, but I think investment is so important. You know, you can't make something for nothing, and investing in great people, particularly, it is just essential. You know, you can't just throw a print story up on a website and expect it to perform, and you can't just churn out shopping galleries and expect them to sell products. You can't just let a bot automate your social media feeds. You need brilliant people who are passionate about digital media and who are willing to really evolve, upskill, and just muck in, I think, with your brand and what you're doing. So I think it's, as we've kind of...
So sorry to interrupt, was that a conscious decision then by Hearst when you joined or soon after to actually employ more people into the social and digital side?
It was a, I can't speak more broadly for Hearst's strategy and kind of what their approach. My experience was that I think we saw good growth. We hired a couple of new people. We saw very fast growth. And I think it was a no-brainer, really. If you're investing in a brand and it's doing well, invest more. I think it's that simple. Obviously there are lots of other things at play as well, but that's ultimately what it came down to, I think, is that we could see the potential in the brand and how it was growing and the direction it was moving in. And so it was definitely important to us that we were very serious about the digital growth of the brand and thought about the website very much as a pure play, almost operating within the Cosmopolitan brand. I think for a long time, magazine websites were just seen as kind of add-ons to the magazine. And I think as time has gone on, people have understood that you can't just treat a website that way. You can't treat social media that way. They are all different and they are all their own mini brands within your overall brand. The content or your approach that we have in print is different to what our content and approach might be sometimes on the website, and is different to our content and the approach we take with that content on Snapchat versus Instagram versus Twitter. So I think that was a big change, was really starting to see each of these platforms and mediums and iterations of our brand as kind of connected and separate in their own way, so that we could really specialize and hone in on what was performing on each of those areas, really.
And which channels have worked particularly well for Cosmo?
They all bring something different to the table. If you have a healthy brand, you shouldn't be able to answer that question with one answer. It's not. I don't think it's a safe brand strategy to go, print's bringing all the money to the table, or actually we're just completely reliant on search traffic, or everything's coming through our social platforms. We're just pumping stuff out on stories and that's where we get everything from. Because things change all the time. In media, it could be, a change in distribution that means paper prices go up, which could change the impact. You could have a Google algorithm change that will change the SEO impact that you're seeing on your website. You might have a core update on a social media platform that's changing the way content is displayed in a feed. So I'm happiest with our brand when all of those things are kind of firing on all cylinders, basically, and they're all bringing something different to the table, which means a lot of plate spinning, because you can't just put your attention on one thing. But yeah, all of our platforms, all of our mediums, I think, bring something equally important to the table in some way, shape or form.
And with social media, is your overriding goal to build brand awareness? Is that what it's all about?
Yes and no. I mean, it varies from platform to platform. I think, on Snapchat, we see phenomenal video views. So that brings something really important to the table. We see some platforms drive more traffic than others. Some platforms drive more engagement than others. And other platforms are really good at driving revenue, whereas other platforms don't even have a revenue model built in. So they're all, again, even when you drill down into social platforms, and even, if I look at a platform like Instagram, looking at the mediums within that one platform, looking at Instagram stories, IGTV, reels, all of those different elements, they're all bringing something different to our overall brand on Instagram as well. So there's a lot of variety and a lot of mix when it comes to content and what performs, but they've all got their place, I think.
I had a quick, before we started chatting, I had a quick look at your YouTube channel. It looks like you've got a lot of fun franchises going on. Was it Text on the Beach, Up Close, Spill the Tea, Most Likely To? And that looks like a lot of fun and huge numbers of views as well, by the looks of things.
Yeah, video, again, has been an area we've just invested massively in. When I joined 8 years ago, we didn't even have a dedicated video head. Video, the bulk of video we were doing was stuff that was happening at, movie junkets that everyone was getting access to, or they were, behind the scenes cover shoot videos. And that was kind of it, really. So while we had a video offering, it was fairly nascent, and we brought on a fantastic video lead about 6.5 years ago. And as I said, we've gone from, almost building that from the ground up to now have 2 video heads, as well as an amazing central team of contributors in the business that all work very closely with Cosmo to hit averaging over 40 million video views a month. And I think that has all come down to great content. As I said, it's you having the expertise there. So we have a really fantastic content team who can figure out, what shows are people going to be watching in 2 months, what talent in those shows do we want to get access to, having a fantastic video team who can create brilliant video that looks polished and is engaging, and then a really strong social team who can give really solid advice on what platforms should this go out and how are we going to sell it. Are we using the YouTube community tool? Is it optimized properly for here? Which aspect ratio are we cutting in? All those things make a difference. So video's been a lot of fun for us. As you said, we've got some really fun franchises, and it's been one of the really sort of fantastic parts of growth in our brand over the last 8 years.
So what are we right in saying that the secret of success in social media is investing in talent and not just trying to recycle everything from one to the other?
Yeah, I mean, I would be a very rich woman if I could tell you the secret of success on social media. I don't know if, our dear Mark Zuckerberg even knows the answer to that. I think there's a combination of things. I think, yes, investing in people, you see it with other brands as well. There's some fantastic sort of brands out there that you wouldn't expect to be great at social media, but actually are very, very funny at it because they've brought on great people. And I think we have a fantastic head of social, a really good deputy social media manager, and a team who's just really engaged with social media themselves, so who love contributing to it, whether it's our beauty team or our entertainment team. So I think the investment in people is important. I think people that have got an eye for social media genuinely use social media themselves, because a lot of people don't. They just see it as an add-on. When I think about our social audience, we have over 5.6 million people following us across our 8 social platforms. So really that in and of its own brand, our head of social who's managing all of those platforms, that is a huge responsibility. And like you said, not just recycling stuff. If you're smart with content, and I think if a piece of content is right for it to do this with, there's absolutely no reason why you can't create one piece of content and use that across multiple platforms, whether that's print, the website, multiple social media platforms. And there are very happy times where something actually just translates perfectly across those things. But even in those instances, you're constantly thinking, but which bit are we promoting on this platform? And is the design going to be a bit different? And how are we optimizing it? And I think treating even one piece of content that travels across platforms, treating it almost as a new piece of content on each of those platforms is very important, because I think, anywhere that's still just kind of using automated feeds, cropping one piece of content 8 ways and just plugging that out everywhere, I think it's very hard to make a success of that.
Now, Claire, in terms of revenue streams, I believe e-commerce is a growing revenue stream for yourselves. Is that the case? E-commerce?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say with e-commerce content and its importance is, I would say it comes down to great, useful, helpful content. That underpins what Cosmo's all about, is saving our reader time, saving them money, helping them make good choices. And certainly e-commerce has been a very happy, natural kind of side effect of that. So
and what have been your key learnings in the area of e-commerce? I don't know what it was like 6 years ago. Is it something which has grown rapidly for you? And how has your strategy evolved over the years?
I mean, it was quite an organic growth, to be honest with you. So I think from the outset, it really did just come down to creating great content. And I think that in and of itself is kind of what has made it so successful for us, because yes, we have shopping galleries, but also a lot of our best performers are actually product recommendations that are sat in wider features, how-tos, explainers. And I think making sure that was the case, and that we really sort of maintained our editorial integrity, has been so important. I always refer my friends to e-commerce content on our website, because I know it is backed up by genuine editorial recommendation and testing, rather than just chasing revenue. And again, that comes back to, I think, having really good departmental expertise in those areas, so that actually, someone on my team would know what material might make a sex toy unsafe, or which product is overpriced on the beauty shelf. So our audience trusts that, I think. And it's worked for us. I think having that expertise, the trust there, the authenticity, we've sort of grown e-commerce really from the ground up. And even looking at 2019 versus this year, we've actually managed to grow our revenues through e-commerce by 180% over that 2-year period. So it's been a really great growth part of our brand. And I'm just very happy that we've sort of managed to carry our readers along on that journey and help them make purchase decisions in a way that they trust.
So what would you say for e-commerce success? What are the kind of key do's and don'ts? So for, let's say, another publisher looking to get into e-commerce, what would your advice be to them?
I think, again, it comes down to just lead with the content. I think it's, I know everyone is wanting to find revenue opportunities, but I think that to come back to our earlier discussion about trust and authenticity, if someone feels like they are being sold to, it's the same as having an annoying pop-up ad that keeps flashing up or a door-to-door salesman knocking on your door every day. I think you start to lose faith in whether a product's actually any good or not. And I think you can, have tons of e-commerce content, but actually if your click-through rate to the product isn't very high, and if your purchase rate from the click-through isn't very high, you're not going to make any money anyway. So it really comes down to building out a team of experts. I think people that have actual strong insights, industry knowledge, can provide really solid recommendations, creating great content, and then thinking, actually, well, if I'm reading a piece on, what trends are coming up in autumn, I'm probably going to want to have some opportunity to shop those trends because it's going to save me time. I think leading from the content is the way to do it. I think shopping galleries serve a purpose, and we have plenty of shopping galleries, but I think that they're in a mix with lots of other content types as well. And I think I would definitely stress the importance of kind of, maintaining authenticity while you're increasing scale of output as well.
And in terms of where Cosmopolitan is heading, you've obviously celebrating your 50th birthday this year. How do you see it evolving over the next few years?
Wow, it's so difficult to say, isn't it? Because I think, I look at the last 50 years and so much has changed in the media landscape, and I think will continue to change. I think it will just become so much more than a magazine. I think I truly believe that the print offering will be here for a long, long time to come. But I'm also really confident that we'll keep evolving and expanding to be that and a lot more. We are a very future-facing brand, fully immersed in the digital landscape our readers are living in. And I love the endless opportunity, really, that provides. I think, the thought that someone might sit on their sofa taking a screen break with the magazine, or be walking through our office virtually in the Metaverse, or sitting in a real-world room with us at a reader event. It's just such an exciting time to broaden Cosmopolitan, really, I think, as a multifaceted experience.
Well, I must ask you about the Metaverse. Any plans in that area?
Yes, actually. I mean, we touched on earlier, obviously, kind of expanding onto new platforms, and that's such an important part of what our brand does, and it's obviously very important to a young audience. So we discovered actually over the last couple of years that around 70% of our readers have heard of the Metaverse, and actually 64% of them are already interested in it or exploring it. So that really led us to start thinking, what is the next stage of, the internet going to be, and people's experience engaging with our brand. And so, it felt like a really natural step for a brand like ours to explore the Metaverse and figure out what our brand was in that space. So we've built a demo, and that'll be taken out to market over the next week. So the concept is basically, we've penned it the Cosmo Summerverse. So essentially, the premise is that it's going to be summer all year round. So which I love. So it's got features like a roller disco, music gigs. There's a beach and a pool party, and there's sort of game elements. There's all sorts going on there. So the idea is that we're want to essentially work with a partner on kind of building it out even more, really. Whether that's a beauty and fashion brand kitting our users out for a cover shoot, a music provider creating the soundtrack to our roller disco, or a food brand serving snacks in the cafe. It's a lot of fun. I think there's so much opportunity there.
And how will people access it? How will your readers access it? Will they need a headset?
So it's accessible through a platform called Roblox. So we decided to work with Roblox because they're actually have a really growing demographic in the 16 to 24-year-old market on their platform. So yeah, it's kind of no surprise really that we decided they seemed like a good platform to work with. So I've actually been getting used to it myself. So you can play it. There's an app you can use on your phone. You can use it on desktop. There's all different iterations that you can engage with, sort of regardless of the levels of tech you have. So I think that was really important to us when we were thinking about how we wanted to do this and the platform we wanted to work with, was that accessibility piece, because I think that these advancements in technology are incredible. And I think that there's a lot of really exciting elements to it in terms of that, you know, the diversity, inclusivity, accessibility piece that is so important to Cosmopolitan, because obviously you're going into a new world. And so that is in some ways accessible to all. And, you know, whether it's someone with a disability, whether there's someone who actually wants to play with a different gender in that world, there's so much possibility there. But I think there's also a lack of accessibility sometimes, potentially, particularly as we're going into this period of cost of living crisis, when it comes to access to tech. So I think that was also important to us, that we weren't pushing on some uber high tech platform that needed, you know, hundreds of pounds of worth of kit to engage with. Actually, with this, you can just play it on your mobile phone, and it's really good fun.
So what will be your pitch? And you're obviously going to roll it out very soon. But what are you going to be telling your readers? What's going to be the pitch to them to encourage them to get on board?
I think there isn't one really. You know, at the moment, that I think it's important to us that we make the environment feel as great as it can do. And I think that's why we're kind of at the moment just playing with this demo. We really want to make sure that it's as exciting and engaging and interactive as it can be. And I think obviously at the moment that's a period of time. That's going to take some time for us to kind of develop that more, hopefully bring some partners on board, and expand what that looks like. We'll obviously promote it to our audience. But as I said, I think actually with a lot of these things, it's not, when we launch on a new platform, for me, it's not about, you know, pitching our audience and trying to encourage them to go on there, because I think we particularly try and experiment on platforms where we know our audience are living and where there is a growing interest anyway to engage with our brand. You know, at the end of the day, just under half of the world's gaming population is female, and actually a Cosmopolitan reader is about 22% more likely than the national average to have gaming as a hobby. Around half of them have gamed in the last 7 days from the research we've done. So we know there is a huge appetite in our audience for gaming. And so I think it will just be a very natural transition. It's certainly not going to be something that we're going to put a load of, you know, marketing budget behind and try and corral millions of people on there. I think it will hopefully be quite a natural transition.
Are you excited about the prospects of the metaverse and what it might bring?
I am. As I said, I think there's a lot about it's very exciting, and a lot about it that's very unknown. I think with any developments in technology, often the tech moves a lot faster than some of the other thought processes that need to be, you know, taken along with these things. So I am, as I said, I think any development that, you know, gets us in front of more people, that gives our audience an opportunity to engage with us and kind of, you know, I love the idea, as I said, that we could have Cosmo readers coming and being able to walk through the virtual Cosmopolitan office in the metaverse. I think that level of access and interaction is it can't be anything other than exciting. But you know, I think as we've talked about, it's kind of jumping in, playing around, being optimistic and excited about it, but also cautiously considering those other very important topics around accessibility, safety, and all of those things as well.
And when you look at the wider women's magazine media sector, where do you see the main challenges and opportunities? So if you take the sector as a whole.
Well, no tea, no shade, but I probably see our biggest competitors as being technology as a whole. Really, I think rather than any other sort of particular women's magazine brand, I think that, you know, the constant emergence of new tech and new platforms, so much of what happens digitally is controlled, as we talked about, by, you know, Google algorithms, social media algorithms, new tech emerging, new apps, new platforms fighting for our audience's attention. And I think those are the challenges we're going to continue to face over the coming years, and the ones we're going to need to keep adapting to. So it's, yeah, you know, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. But equally, those things are also the things that provide us with great opportunity. You know, fighting for our audience's attention means we have to be the best at what we do. And luckily, I know that we are.
And finally, Claire, a question we ask all our guests on the podcast. Outside of work, how do you relax?
It takes practice. I'm a perfectionist and I'm very passionate about my work. So that's probably a bit of a lethal combination and not always particularly conducive to unwinding, I have to say. But for me, it's really my partner, my friends, my family are just an absolute tonic to my soul. They always bring me back to myself and make me laugh. And we always have such a wonderful time together. Aside from that, I'd probably say a good book, binging a TV show, going to the cinema, doing yoga, running, and sleeping as long as I have time to sleep, really. I wish I could just make the day longer so I could sleep for 10 hours every night.
Yeah, we need a few more hours in the day. So binge TV series, Netflix series, anything you could recommend? What have you been immersed in recently that you could recommend to others?
I'm currently, after many times of debating whether I should get it, because I think there's absolute platform overload when it comes to streaming services, I finally took the leap and downloaded Apple TV, and I'm currently midway through Severance and absolutely loving it. So I would thoroughly recommend that. It's very thought-provoking, very fun, very dry and well written. I'm also very throwback of me, but I am, for the first time ever, I hate to say, watching The West Wing for the first time and loving it. It just feels, it's very of its time, and I kind of love that about it. It makes me feel very comforted watching it, even though there's some very serious topics in it.
Claire, those sound like very good tips. Claire Hodgson, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thanks, James.
A final word from our valued podcast sponsor. Air Business is trusted by 4,000 publications and 3 million happy subscribers, with 10 million customer records on file. It processes £500 million each year in 22 currencies and delivers over 300 million items. Find out more at airbusiness.com. Many thanks to Claire for being our guest this time. I particularly liked her emphasis on trust and inclusivity, investing in quality content and remaining relevant. Cosmopolitan's website can be found at cosmopolitan.com/UK. They can also be found on all the main social platforms and, as we just heard, the Metaverse too. And of course you can pick up your print copy from the newsstand today. For more information about us and to listen to previous podcasts, please go to our website, inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in a few weeks' time for another podcast. Bye for now.